I was sharing this story off air with Dr. Tripp, and I'll share it with all of you right now as you're tuning in. And I've got something I wanted to share with you in this segment of the program. It's about 4 minutes in length. Comes from one of my favorite all-time movies. And let me just give you a little background on this. In the 1920s, there was a young actor. Actually, he was Canadian. He was from Toronto, and he was acting on the stage in the U.S. His name was Raymond Massey. Raymond Massey was in a play, and when the play finished that night, he was backstage when all of a sudden an old man approached him to talk with him, and he didn't know who this fellow was. Apparently, though, the man was important enough that people who were working at the theater allowed him backstage. And the old man walked forward, put out his hand to shake, and he said, "My name's Robert Lincoln, and you sound just like my father." Of course, Robert Lincoln's father was the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. And we don't know what Abraham Lincoln sounded like because we didn't have. So we read the great words of the Gettysburg Address. We read the great words that came out of his House Divided speech, and we don't know what it would have sounded like. We're told that he had somewhat of a reedy sort of tone to his voice, very high-pitched Midwestern accent, nasal accent. You might want to think about the accent, for instance, that Harry Truman had, if you're looking to try to identify that. But if Robert Lincoln said that Robert Massey was pretty much a dead ringer for his father, then I guess what you could say is that Robert Massey sounded just like Abraham Lincoln. About 15 years later, Massey was cast in a movie called Abe Lincoln in Illinois in the title role. Now, Massey was almost 6 feet 4 and had a very strong resemblance as well to Abe Lincoln. And his sound when he went in to read for the part and he said, "Well, Lincoln's son says," and that was enough to sell the people on him for the movie. Now, it had been a play first. Massey took it to the movies. If you've never seen the film, you're missing a real treat because it really lays bare the Lincoln marriage and all of the difficulties and Lincoln's profound depression throughout most of his life. But the interesting thing is in history, you look back and you see the great leaders who were people who struggled with that, Winston Churchill being another one, people who were profoundly depressed through parts of their lives, but they stood up and they did great things. I happened to watch the movie again yesterday. I was unpacking some things at my house and I pulled the DVD out of a box and I popped it in and watched it before I went to bed last night. And I wanted to share a little bit of this with you. I've got the House Divided speech. That's a little long for the moment. Maybe another day we'll share that as well. But at the end of the picture, this is Raymond Massey playing Abraham Lincoln as he's departing for Washington. The picture ends as he leaves Springfield, Illinois. He's been elected president, and he stops to talk to the people who he has grown to know as neighbors and friends before his train departs. And he speculates on what's ahead with the next several years in Washington. This is what a real leader sounds like. And you have to ask yourself, do we have any available today? It's 10 after 9 o'clock. 28, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Raymond Massey as Abraham Lincoln.
No one not in my situation can appreciate my feelings of sadness at this parting. To this place and the kindness of you people, I owe everything. I now leave not knowing when or whether ever I may return. It is a grave duty that I must face. In preparing for it, I have tried to inquire what great principle or ideal it is which has kept this union so long together. And I believe that it was not the mere matter of separation of the colonies from the motherland, but that sentiment in the Declaration of Independence which gave liberty to the people of this country and hope to all the world. We gained democracy, and there is now doubt whether it is fit to survive. I have heard of an Eastern monarch who once charged his wise men to invent him a sentence which should be true and appropriate at all times and situations. They presented him with the words, "And this too shall pass away." That's a comforting thought in times of affliction. And this too shall pass away. Yet, let us believe that it is not true. Let us live to prove that we can cultivate the natural world around us and the intellectual and moral world within us, so that we may secure an individual, social, and political prosperity, whose course shall be forward, and which, while this earth endures, shall not pass away. I commend you to the care of the Almighty, and I hope in your prayers you may remember me. Friends, one and all, I must now bid you an affectionate farewell.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the great wrath was torn. He has loosed the painful lightning of his perilous return. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Now, you have to remember, this movie was released just 1 year before the United States got involved with World War II. And as I was referencing the other day that book, The Fourth Turning, that every 80 years it seems that America finds a great leader to lead us through a great crisis. George Washington, 80 years later, roughly, comes Abraham Lincoln. 80 years later, on the eve of World War II, comes Franklin Roosevelt. And as I've said in the past, you may not agree with what Roosevelt did when he came up with a New Deal, but this country was darn lucky. Well, maybe blessed that he happened to be the president as we went into World War II, because he was one of the men who was really cut out for dealing with a crisis like that. So here we are, just a few years shy of another 80-year anniversary. 2020, just 4 years away, and you ask yourself as you listen to the political rhetoric coming from candidates today, and as I pointed out, Massey supposedly sounded just like Abraham Lincoln, according to Lincoln's son Robert. You ask yourself today, where are the people of that stature? Now, likely we have them, but here's the question. Are any of them currently running for political office, for the highest office in the land here in 2016? Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I do want to mention some of the fine sponsors who work with us here at KLIX on a daily basis, including my friends at Dream Room Design. They've been in business now for about 16 years. Owner Bill Conant provides hands-on personal attention to each project, overseeing the job from start to finish. Bill will personally come to your home and help you design your dream project. Better Business Bureau accredited with an A-plus rating. Many times as homeowners, you'll find you deal with large companies with offices all over the state. With Dream Room Design, you get one-on-one personal attention and a relationship throughout the project. Visit dreamroomdesign.com to find reviews, written and video testimonials, before and after pictures, product videos, and a ton of details about the company and the services that it provides. 736-0300, it's 916. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and we have a caller with us. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. I think that was an excellent intro. I personally believe that the Constitution was brought forth by the hand of God. I have no doubt that I feel it all the way to my core. That's why I have such a hard time with the election system this term, because there's so many people out there that claim they're going to do good for our country, but have no constitutional background. There's not too many of them out there talking anything about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I believe if our government spent 1/3 of the time living up to their oath to uphold the Constitution instead of figuring out how to go around it, we'd be better off. So we need to ask ourselves, who's up there that will uphold the Constitution and the Bill of Rights?
It's a great question, and I thank you for the call, 736-0300. The thing that the movie drove home while I was watching it yesterday, Lincoln didn't want the job. Lincoln, and it was repeated multiple times through the movie, his wife pushed him, his friends pushed him, his law partners pushed him toward politics. Lincoln just wanted to be left alone, live his life, and he had other pursuits, other interests, and yet he, as you heard in that's from the actual farewell speech in Springfield. That's verbatim. He had a premonition that by doing this, he wasn't going to survive. And yet, despite his desire to just live a quiet life as a quiet man in a small town in America, he kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. You know, it's not about what God does for you, it's about what God wants from you. And Mr. Lincoln knew as he was boarding that train, and his wife had mentioned it many times, that he had a premonition of a terrible death. He gave his life for this cause that he felt was big enough, bigger than him, and that it was worth making that sacrifice for your fellow man and for God. Despite the fact that he was considered by many before he was elected to the presidency to be a little bit on the agnostic side, Lincoln was a believer. He just wasn't a churchgoer. But it also shows you that, because God could pick the rich people to be his messengers, he could pick the comfortable to be his messengers, but then why would they take him up on it if they already have money and comfort? You know, he's telling you, look, I'm sending you on a mission and it could get you killed, and you're probably going to die. They're not the people that he's going after. But this just shows you how people from the middle of nowhere can stand up and end up becoming perhaps the greatest leader this country has ever seen. And in world history, I think you would have to say he's among the all-time greats as well. And then you look at the field of Republicans and Democrats this year, and I know we all have our favorites, but still, this is the minor leagues, folks. In fact, speaking of that, I've got some thoughts on the Democrat debate coming up in just a moment on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 9:28 here on Top Story. I did not watch the Dog and Pony Show on PBS last night, the Democrats debate. There are just two of them now left on the stage, have been for quite some time. But I do have some thoughts about it on the way in just a moment. 9:24, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 29, and on our way into a stretch of nice weather. By the time we get into next week, we're looking at about 3 or 4 straight days with temperatures in the 50s. No complaints here. I do want to remind you about our friends at High Desert Meat Processing here in Twin Falls, where they process one animal at a time. What you bring in is exactly what you're going to get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner, has been in business. He's been doing this nearly 35 years. Visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook, and you'll see reviews of customers, and very good reviews. Or give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and your domestic processing needs. 734-9949. Now, nothing gets shipped out. There's in-house smoking, specialty meats, jerky, pepperoni, salami, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and much more, USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. 734-9949. This debate last night, candidates got into a snit about Henry Kissinger, who, let's face it, hasn't had any real impact on American politics for 40 years. Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State in the late years of the Nixon administration and then during the brief period of the Ford administration. He is a man that I would say, from a perspective of, well, he's a globalist, let's be honest. He may have served some Republicans, but he also served some Democrats as well in office. He was a hired gun, if you will, when it comes to diplomacy. He's the man ultimately responsible for the 1973 Arab oil embargo and allowing people in that part of the world to realize they could muscle us when it came to oil. Of course, they can't do it any longer. He's the man responsible for a coup in Chile that left thousands, tens of thousands dead. And his hand has been in a lot of these serious situations all over the world. Hillary Clinton has said that Kissinger is a great advisor and a close friend. Bernie Sanders took issue with this and, trying to show off his socialist bona fides, had this to say.
In the last debate, I believe in her book, very good book, by the way, in her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger.
Did you hear Rush Limbaugh say this the other day? Right and left, it's not a straight line, it's a circle. I heard Rush say that, and my 10th grade history teacher, Carol Aiken, told us the same thing way back in, I think, 1977, 78. She went to the blackboard. Yes, we still had blackboards, and she took a piece of chalk and she drew a big circle. And where the circle met at the top, on one side were libertarians and on the other side were communists, because people say, well, how can that be? Certain views end up merging. For instance, Pat Buchanan has said there are certain things he agrees with when it comes to talking about Bernie Sanders. So those on the far right don't like Henry Kissinger. Those on the far left don't like Henry Kissinger. The candidates also talked about race because they're under pressure from that organization, Black Lives Matter, to talk only about that issue. This is Bernie Sanders offering some thoughts on that last night. Bernie, though, has been sticking to this ever since he started campaigning. All lives matter.
Now, you are a worker, white worker, black worker, who had a decent job. That manufacturing job has got, what do you got now? You're working at McDonald's? That is why there is massive despair all over this country. People have worked their entire lives. They're making a half, two-thirds what they used to make. Their kids are having a hard time finding any work at all.
And again, he sounds in some cases like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz when it comes to people finding work in this country. And then Hillary Clinton often was parroting, that is, as a parrot, a lot of animal comparisons in her life. She was parroting what Mr. Sanders was saying throughout much of the debate. In other words, she's so desperate to win his voters, she may as just well say, I agree with Bernie.
I am deeply concerned about what's happening in every community in America, and that includes white communities where we are seeing an increase in alcoholism, addiction, earlier deaths. People with a high school education or less are not even living as long as their parents lived. This is a remarkable and horrifying fact.
She'll get back to pandering to black people tomorrow. You know, Bernie's a Jew. You know, those Jews, they own Harlem. You know, those Jews charge really big rents. You know, those Jews are bankers. Yeah. They won't let you borrow for a... You know she's going to be doing it. They've done it before on the Clinton team. And it's going to happen. Now, John Lewis, member of the House of Representatives who served with Bernie Sanders, always called a civil rights icon, John Lewis. John Lewis says he never met Bernie Sanders because Sanders said he was involved in some of those demonstrations in the 1960s, even got arrested. Lewis says, I do remember meeting the Clintons in the late 60s, but I don't remember meeting Bernie Sanders. Well, Mr. Lewis, how many tens of thousands of people did you meet at those rallies that you would remember? But they've already got out the long knives for Bernie Sanders. He's become too much of a threat to Team Clinton. Speaking of race, a couple of thoughts on that coming up in just a few minutes on our program. Not that it's a big deal in southern Idaho, but I guess it's a growing issue just because of the racial composition changing.